Jesus was a communist. So here's a thought. What if I told you that Jesus Christ was actually the original communist? Hear me out. I'm not saying Jesus was out there waving a Soviet flag or organizing labor strikes against Roman authorities, but when you dig into his teachings, things start looking surprisingly left-wing. Seriously, grab a Bible and flip through the pages of the New Testament. Take the book of Acts, for example. Acts 2:44 through 45 literally says all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Sounds less like Wall Street's capitalism and more like a workers' co-op. And Jesus himself goes even further. Remember when he told that rich young ruler in Matthew 19:21, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Imagine saying that today on the internet. You'd be labeled a radical, but that's the thing. Jesus didn't mince words. In Matthew 6:24, he straight up said, you cannot serve both God and money. Think about that. He's basically calling out greed-driven society, consumerism, and wealth hoarding thousands of years before Marx even thought to write down the word bourgeoisie. And the famous Sermon on the Mount, he openly says, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Luke 6:20, and then turns around and warns the wealthy, woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort. Luke 6:24. He even disrupted the financial institutions of his time. Remember flipping the tables in the temple? That was literally Jesus overthrowing the tables of money changers, people exploiting the religious poor for profit. Now, I'm not here saying that Jesus had a copy of Das Kapital tucked under his robe or something, but there's clearly something revolutionary in his teachings, something profoundly anti-capitalist and communal. So why don't we ever hear about this side of him from mainstream churches or televangelists who preach the prosperity gospel in designer suits? Well, maybe it's easier to preach Jesus as a soft-spoken pacifist than a revolutionary challenging the very economic order we comfortably inhabit today. But the next time you see some person using Jesus' name to justify lavish lifestyles, maybe remind them that the man that they're quoting literally said, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Mark 10:25. Sounds radical maybe, but you can't deny it straight from the source. I have noticed when trying to lose weight that the mind plays a vital role, and trying to break the unhealthy habits you have practiced for years, like my craving for hot chips, can be hard without help. This is where Hypnosio comes in. Hypnosio is a revolutionary self-hypnotherapy app designed to transform your weight loss journey by addressing the root causes of weight management challenges. Instead of relying only on diet and exercise like most weight loss approaches, Hypnosio taps into the subconscious mind to build lasting behavioral changes. From reducing stress and cortisol levels from a biologically favorable weight loss environment, teaching mindful eating, helping users recognize true hunger signals, to overcoming food anxiety and social eating struggles. It is easy to integrate into your life as it works from any device, an affordable alternative to in-person hypnotherapy. And it's not just a quick fix though. 94% of users maintain weight loss better than control groups. Research also shows sustained weight loss maintained for 18 plus months after stopping therapy. Use my link in the description box and pinned comment and grab 15% off your first subscription. Right now there is a 6-month plan at $11 per month. At 75% off, that's currently the best value. Yakub. Have you ever heard of the story of Yakub, the mad scientist who, according to the Nation of Islam, actually created white people? Yeah, I know, sounds like something straight out of a comic book or a sci-fi movie, but for real, this is a central belief in the Nation of Islam theology. So here's the breakdown. Yakub, sometimes known as the Big Hit Scientist, was supposedly born around 6,600 years ago on the island of Patmos. That's right, the same island from the Bible's book of Revelation. And this guy wasn't your average kid. Legend has it that Yakub had a gigantic head and an even bigger brain, bursting with genius level intelligence. He was so brilliant they say that by age 18, he'd already mastered every branch of science. But Yakub had a bit of a dark streak. He wasn't content with just being a prodigy. Nope. Yakub had ambitions that were pretty hardcore. He wanted to create a new rebellious race of people. Why? Well, he reportedly saw himself as a rival to God, determined to build a people who would rule through cunning, manipulation, and deception, basically the ultimate villains. So Yakub gathered thousands of his followers to set sail and landed on an island where he could begin his twisted genetic experiments. through careful selective breeding, think ancient genetic engineering meets mad scientist type vibes, he started isolating lighter skinned individuals, mating them together repeatedly, generation after generation, over hundreds of years, according to the Nation of Islam's teachings, detailed by Elijah Muhammad in his book Message to the Black Man in America. Yakub's experiments gradually produced lighter skin, weaker bones, thinner hair, and personalities more inclined towards manipulation and dominance. Eventually, this systematic breeding led to the creation of an entirely new race, the white race as we know today, seen by Yakub as tools to dominate and oppress humanity. Wild, right? But it gets even stranger. After Yakub died, his followers supposedly continued his experiments, ultimately sending this new pale-skinned people out from the island back into the world. Elijah Muhammad taught that these newly created people returned to civilization, using deceit, lies, and violence to rise to power, ultimately ushering in 6,000 years of domination and oppression against the darker-skinned original peoples of Earth. Now, obviously, mainstream historians and anthropologists completely dismiss this narrative as mythical and scientifically impossible, but for the Nation of Islam, the story of Yakub isn't just allegory, it's core doctrine. It explains their understanding of race relations, historical oppression, and societal structures in America and around the world. So yeah, when you first hear about Yakub, it sounds completely insane, like something out of an ancient sci-fi novel, but dig deeper and you'll see that this bizarre tale is part of a larger attempt to make sense of historical oppression and give followers a narrative that frames racial struggles as something cosmic, historical, even divine in nature. Fact or fiction, Yakub's legend is easily one of the most unique and provocative origin stories you've probably never heard before. Trump and Epstein. Alright, let's talk about a friendship that Donald Trump probably wishes everyone would just forget. His surprisingly close ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, that same Epstein who became infamous for a host of shady dealings and disturbing allegations that rocked the political and celebrity worlds alike. Now, long before Epstein's name was headline news, he and Trump were actually buddies back in the glitzy 80s and 90s party scene of New York and Palm Beach. And there's no shortage of photographic evidence of this either, smiling together at Mar-a-Lago parties, rubbing elbows at lavish galas, and seemingly living the kind of jet-set life most people only dream about. Trump even gave Epstein a glowing compliment in a 2002 New York magazine article saying, and this is a real quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." Yeah. But he regrets saying that now. Things got more complicated later on though. By 2007, their friendship reportedly hit a rough patch, supposedly over some drama involving a real estate deal gone bad. Some say it was Epstein crossing a line at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club that led to his membership being revoked. Whatever it was, Trump distanced himself fast, later insisting publicly he hadn't spoken to Epstein for many years. But here's the catch: old connections are hard to shake, especially when you're dealing with figures this big. Flight logs showed Epstein flew on private jets with many high-profile figures, and Trump reportedly flew at least once on Epstein's plane in the late 90s, though Trump claims he never went to Epstein's private island, a place that later became notorious. Plus, there's footage from NBC dating back to 1992 showing Trump and Epstein hanging out at Mar-a-Lago, joking around, whispering in each other's ears, laughing like good old pals. Trump's defenders often point out that he wasn't alone though. Epstein had ties to tons of influential figures from presidents to billionaires, but the fact still remains that for years, Trump openly associated with Epstein without hesitation. By the time Epstein's scandal exploded into public view though, Trump had totally changed his tune, famously remarking to the press, "I was not a fan of his, that I can tell you," a pretty sharp contrast to his earlier statement. Now, does this connection automatically imply wrongdoing on Trump's part? Of course not, but it does highlight that sometimes uncomfortable relationships that exist among the super rich, and how quickly powerful figures try to rewrite their own histories when the spotlight turns ugly. Even today, Epstein's legacy and those tangled up in it, awkward friendships and such still cast a shadow over some of the most powerful people in the world, and Trump, like it or not, remains one of them. Trump has unleashed a frenzy of angry posts on Truth Social, furiously demanding supporters drop the Epstein story. calling it a radical left scam, and labeling anyone who keeps pushing the subject weaklings. In one particularly memorable rant, Trump snapped at reporters. "Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. It's pretty boring stuff." But here's the problem for Trump. His own supporters aren't exactly on board. MAGA followers, the same people who passionately defended Trump for years, have begun to push back, openly wondering why their hero is suddenly so defensive about Epstein. It doesn't help that unreleased Epstein documents reportedly mention Trump's name, a revelation that's left even loyal fans suspicious and skeptical. Conservative Twitter and Truth Social threads exploded, with longtime Trump backers openly calling him out, demanding transparency, and accusing him of betrayal. Things got so heated that Trump personally phoned influential MAGA voice Charlie Kirk to shut down the controversy. Kirk initially brought up Epstein during a Turning Point USA summit, arguing passionately for the release of these so-called Epstein files, saying conservatives deserve to know the truth, no matter who it implicated. But after Trump's direct intervention, Kirk reversed course almost immediately, awkwardly stating that he would stop discussing Epstein unless substantial new developments occurred. It left many followers feeling betrayed and confused, wondering aloud if Trump had something to do with this and had a serious allegation to hide or something. Even Elon Musk waded into the chaos, flooding social media with dozens of posts about the Epstein files, suggesting Trump's administration was deliberately covering things up. Musk later deleted a tweet explicitly mentioning Trump's name, but the damage was already done. His followers were already buzzing about conspiracies and cover-ups. All of this chaos raises an uncomfortable question. Why is Trump so frantic about silencing conversations surrounding Epstein now? Milk is in a pickle. Okay, let's dive into one of the weirdest intersections ever, the Milk Boys. Yeah, the same guys who made their name doing wild pranks and outrageous partying, somehow landing an interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, seriously, how do you go from shotgunning drinks on YouTube to casually chatting geopolitics with one of the most controversial world leaders alive today? Well, here's how it happened, and trust me, it gets pretty bizarre. So, the Milk Boys, led by Kyle Forgiard, got invited to Israel with some connection to Steiny, and out of nowhere, they find themselves in a room with Netanyahu himself, leading people to believe that, well, they're getting paid to do this by you-know-who. But there's a catch. Kyle later spilled the tea, admitting openly on camera that their team was actually given a list of pre-approved questions by Netanyahu's people. Yep, the Full Send podcast, known for being raw and unfiltered, apparently suddenly had rules to follow. Pretty strange, right? Kyle even mentioned how intimidating the whole experience was, describing the room as being literally packed with Netanyahu's elite security agents staring them down from every corner. Imagine trying to keep it casual and entertaining with intense-looking guards breathing down your neck, watching your every move. Not exactly your typical milk prank video setup, but why didn't Netanyahu get harsher questions and all this? Well, it's because they simply felt intimidated, is their excuse. Well, the Milk Boys do have connections, and I'm not just talking celebrities or influencers here. Remember, the same guys had direct access to Donald Trump himself, hosting Trump in their podcast in 2022. It became so large that it got millions of views in a matter of hours before YouTube took it down for spreading misinformation about elections. Trump even later invited the Milk crew to hang out at Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, Kyle, Steve will do it, and the crew literally chilling at Trump's estate like it's a casual Friday night. It's the level of political access that might have made Netanyahu think the Milk Boys were the perfect group to help him reach a younger American audience, to build loyalty towards Israel. It raises some wild questions, doesn't it? Like, how did a prank channel turned influential podcast suddenly become the go-to platform for heavyweight politicians trying to speak directly to Gen Z? And does the White House connection suggest something deeper at play here, where politicians now see viral influencers as the fastest route to shaping public opinion? After all, traditional media doesn't always get through anymore, but these guys, they get millions of devoted fans watching them and their every upload, no matter how ridiculous the content is. In the end, what started as just a group of friends doing hilarious pranks somehow transformed into a political powerhouse platform that leaders like Trump and Netanyahu actually take seriously. Who saw that coming? Whether you're laughing at the absurdity or genuinely concerned about influencers turning into political insiders overnight, one thing's clear: the Milk Boys aren't just pranksters anymore, and they're not one of a kind. Gilgamishs Tomb. let's talk about one of the strangest archaeological rabbit holes you've probably never heard about, or more accurately, heard and then never heard anything else again. Back in 2003, right as the United States was invading Iraq under the banner of weapons of mass destruction, something bizarre happened that got barely a blip in the mainstream news cycle. German archaeologists allegedly discovered the tomb of Gilgamesh, the ancient Mesopotamian king, demigod, and main character of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is considered the oldest surviving piece of literature known to humankind. According to reports, a team using advanced ground-penetrating radar in the Iraqi desert near the ancient city of Uruk located a structure that matched the description of Gilgamesh's burial site with uncanny precision. The radar picked up what appeared to be a vast chambered tomb, complete with a central body platform surrounded by walls and canals, eerily similar to how Gilgamesh's burial was described in the ancient text. German newspaper Der Spiegel briefly reported on it at the time, quoting the lead archaeologist, Georg Fassbender, who said, "We found an amazing structure, especially one that corresponds to the description of Gilgamesh's tomb from the epic, but then it went radio silent." The site was reportedly taken over by United States military forces not long after, and everything went real quiet. No follow-up studies, no photographs released, no peer-reviewed articles. It's like the most important archaeological find of the century just got swept under the sand. So what happened? Why would the supposed tomb of a mythic king, possibly even the historical inspiration behind flood myths like Noah's Ark, be covered up? Well, here's where the speculation machine goes into overdrive. Some believe the United States military was more interested in ancient technology than weapons of mass destruction. There are rumors, yes, unconfirmed but persistent, that the tomb contained items of advanced origin, maybe even pre-flood technology or relics tied to ancient Sumerian deities like Enki and Anu. Others suggest it was simply geopolitics, looting and protecting cultural artifacts during wartime. But if that's the case, why has no legitimate academic dig resumed work on what could be one of the most valuable archaeological sites in human history? Then there's the more symbolic theory. Maybe it's not about technology or treasure, but about rewriting history. Gilgamesh's story predates the Bible by over 1,000 years, yet it shares eerily similar themes: a serpent that steals immortality, a great flood that wipes out mankind, and a man struggling with the meaning of life and death. Finding this tomb would be like digging up Atlantis, and it shakes up the foundations of religion, mythology, and human origin stories all in one go. Maybe that's just too much for the world to handle all at once. So was Gilgamesh real? Was his tomb really found? And if so, was it sealed off, buried again, not by time but by silence? Whatever the truth is, it seems like someone decided that the story of Gilgamesh's final resting place wasn't ready for public consumption. The Maya and their computer. It's not often the NSA, the United States' most secretive intelligence agency, gets involved in ancient Mesoamerican manuscripts, but in 1977, buried in a now declassified technical journal, they published something most people have never heard of: the Maya astronomical computer. The title alone raises eyebrows, but what's inside is even stranger. This wasn't just a commentary on Mayan astronomy, it was an internal analysis by a government cryptanalyst who believed the Dresden Codex, a pre-Hispanic Maya manuscript, contained the structure of a functioning symbolic computer, not digital, not mechanical, but algorithmic in its logic, a kind of paper-based supercomputer designed not just to track time, but to predict the future through cycles. Now, the Dresden Codex has long been known for its incredible astronomical precision. It includes eclipse tables, Venus cycles, lunar data, all calculated with mind-bending accuracy. But this NSA paper didn't just admire the math. It claimed that the Maya didn't just observe the heavens, they encoded them, that the Codex contained a working symbolic system of interlocking cycles that modeled cosmic and earthly phenomena as part of a giant predictive engine. Think of it this way: not a physical machine with gears, but a recursive layered text that behaves like a machine. Input in the form of dates, output in the form of predictions. The analyst, Charles H. Smiley, described the codex's logic as a modular computation system. Basically, the Maya weren't just using calendars, they were stacking time loops on top of each other like rotating disks in a safe. When these cycles aligned, certain planetary positions eclipsed nodes. Sacred days, they formed a kind of key, unlocking the meaning of marking the return of world-changing events. They weren't just celestial predictions, they were historical algorithms. Time for the Maya wasn't linear, it curved, it repeated, echoed, and according to this report, the NSA knew it. What makes this more than just another fringe theory is the fact that this wasn't written by a Maya scholar trying to interpret glyphs. It was written by someone trained to break codes, and it was published not in an anthropology journal, but in a cryptologic quarterly, the NSA's own in-house technical publication. That's not a tabloid, that's where advanced signal analysts and math theorists publish their work. The question then becomes, why would America's most secretive signal intelligence agency devote its resources to ancient Mayan calendars? Here's where things start to get more unsettling though. After this document was declassified, it just sort of vanished from public conversation. No major universities followed up, no public grants were issued, and the original physical codex, one of only 4 known to exist, is locked away in a museum in Germany, almost totally inaccessible to independent researchers. And yet, inside military and intelligence circles, there was reportedly a renewed interest in indigenous models of time, not just as cultural history, but as predictive science. If the Maya had a way of modeling long-term planetary effects, solar flare patterns, agricultural collapse, or societal unrest, patterns that repeat on a macro scale, then the intelligence world would absolutely want to know about it. Not because they believe in prophecies and stuff like that, but because they understand systems, the same way an algorithm can predict your next purchase or location. A sufficiently complex cyclical model of time might help predict climate trends, economic shifts, and even social movements, especially if those cycles are tied to natural celestial events. But here's the kicker: after this paper came to light, references to the Maya astronomical computer started appearing in fringe forums. Some believe the NSA's cryptanalysis went even further, that the codices may contain predictive markers related to solar storms, global unrest, or planetary alignments that repeat every few hundred years. In other words, that the Maya left behind a working model of reality that modern science is only just beginning to decode. Of course, there's no official statement from the NSA on this, and there likely never will be, but when a government code-breaking agency dips into ancient texts, writes a technical breakdown of a symbolic time machine, and then never follows it up publicly, that alone tells you something unusual happened, something important, and maybe even something that someone doesn't want people asking about. Wi-Fi is tracking you. Most people think of their Wi-Fi router as just a little black box that brings the internet to their phones, laptops, and smart TVs. But what if I told you that same router sitting quietly on your shelf could also see you, literally map your position inside your home in real time? And not just you, it can track your pets, your guests, your hand gestures, even your breathing. Welcome to the unsettling reality of Wi-Fi sensing, a technology that's not science fiction, it's now science fact, and it's already being used in research labs, corporate experiments, and yes, some consumer products, whether you realize it or not. Here's how it works. Every time you move through your home, you disrupt the radio waves emitted by your router. Your body absorbs and reflects those signals, creating tiny distortions in the way the signals bounce back to the device. This is called radio frequency, RF sensing, and it's so precise that with the right software, those disturbances can be turned into a 3D model of your environment, like sonar or echolocation, but made of invisible Wi-Fi ripples. Researchers at MIT and the University of California have already demonstrated this, using nothing more than a standard router and a few algorithms. They've been able to track a person's location within a few centimeters, even through walls. One MIT project called RF Pose used neural networks trained on radio wave reflections to not only detect a person's position, but also reconstruct their pose and movement in real time. Think full body motion capture, no cameras needed. That's not a prediction of the future, that's already been done in peer-reviewed studies. And it gets weirder. Some experiments have shown that Wi-Fi can be used to monitor heart rates, sleep patterns, and even identify individual people by the way their bodies affect the signal. Amazon, Google, and other smart home companies are already filing patents and rolling out early versions of this technology. Some of the newer mesh routers and smart home security devices quietly advertise motion sensing features, but they rarely explain how it works. Spoiler alert, it's using the Wi-Fi. Now, here's where the conspiracy alarm bells start ringing. Not because this is unproven, but because it's real and already quietly commercialized. Imagine how valuable this kind of spatial surveillance would be for advertisers, insurers, or governments. A system that lets you monitor not just what someone clicks on, but how they move, how often they're home, whether they're alone or with others, without them ever knowing. No cameras needed, no microphones, just ambient radio waves and AI. And no, this doesn't mean your Wi-Fi router is evil or that your ISP is watching you just yet. But the potential is there. All it takes is a software update or a third-party app to turn that passive router into a live tracking system. In fact, law enforcement agencies have already experimented with RF-based tracking systems in hostage situations and search and rescue. It's only a matter of time before the tech trickles down into more invasive uses. The scary part is that you can't turn it off, even if you encrypt your data, even if you don't have any smart assistants or cameras in your house. Your physical body is still altering the electromagnetic environment, and for a system trained to read the environment, your privacy becomes a physics problem, not a settings issue. So next time you're walking around your house and what you believe is solitude and privacy, remember, the walls aren't just watching you, but the waves might be. Not because you're paranoid, but because surveillance isn't coming, it's already ambient and built into our very life, invisible, wireless, and always on. Did Ghislaine Maxwell have a Reddit? Here's something that might completely change how you see one of your favorite sites on the internet. What if I told you Ghislaine Maxwell, the infamous associate of Jeffrey Epstein, might have secretly had influence over Reddit? Yeah, Reddit, everyone's favorite front page of memes, news, conspiracies, and cute animal pics. I know it sounds absurd, like a conspiracy that wandered way off the trail, but there's actually a bizarre paper trail that makes this theory way more interesting than it has any right to be. Back in 2011, Reddit appointed a new CEO named Ellen Powell. Not weird, right? Well, Ellen Powell's connection to Ghislaine Maxwell runs through Maxwell's mysterious, high-powered social circles. Ellen Powell herself revealed this connection in a bombshell tweet saying, quote, "She was at the Kleiner holiday party in 2011, but I had no desire to meet her, much less have a photo taken with her. We knew about her supplying underage for Epstein back then, but I guess that was fine with the cool people who managed the tightly controlled guest list." Wait, pause right there. According to Powell herself, the Silicon Valley elite knew exactly what Maxwell was involved in, yet they still welcomed her into their tight inner circles. That's not some fringe blogger, that's Reddit's former CEO, openly saying Maxwell was casually hanging out at high-level Silicon Valley events years before she was infamous worldwide. But it gets stranger. Reddit's deep financial ties adds fuel to this fire. Reddit was heavily funded and backed by major venture capital firms like Andreessen Horowitz and influential figures like Alexis Ohanian. These same Silicon Valley figures regularly brush shoulders with Maxwell, Epstein, and their entourage at dinners, galas, and private parties from New York to Palo Alto. Photos exist of Maxwell casually mingling at events with executives closely tied to Reddit's core investors, appearing comfortable among the very people pulling Reddit strings behind the scenes. Now, does this mean Maxwell literally sat in a room controlling Reddit's algorithms or deciding which cat videos hit the front page? Probably not, but did she wield unseen influence through her elite connections, possibly shaping how Reddit managed controversial content, censorship decisions, or even high-level policy? It's at least plausible and frankly more realistic than we'd like to think. Remember, Reddit is immensely powerful. It's not just memes. It's where opinions are shaped, where millions get their news and sometimes their worldview and leaks and stuff like that. Having behind-the-scenes access or even subtle influence on such a platform would be incredibly valuable for anyone looking to steer public opinion quietly. And Maxwell was no amateur at navigating these networks. She was deeply embedded in technology and media circles long before her arrest, a social engineer who knew exactly how influence worked. Of course, Reddit has never officially acknowledged any direct Maxwell connection. They've mostly avoided the topic entirely, probably for obvious reasons, but silence doesn't erase Maxwell's proximity to some of the most powerful tech leaders and financiers who were behind Reddit's rise. It's also worth remembering that after Ellen Pau's controversial tenure at Reddit, during which major decisions about censorship and moderation were made, she later called out Maxwell directly, perhaps trying to distance herself from a past she realized was radioactive. Like, why even mention Maxwell publicly if there wasn't more beneath the surface? At minimum, it's clear Reddit's early investors and leadership moved comfortably in the same circles as Maxwell. At worst, Reddit's policies and even structure of the site itself could have been quietly nudged by forces connected to Epstein's infamous associate. Either way, it's a sobering reminder even your favorite websites aren't immune to these shadowy connections and strange bedfellows of power. Next time you're scrolling Reddit late at night, remember that sometimes the internet's front page might just be shaped by people you'd least expect, or at least want. Isaac Newton isn't just the Apple and calculus guy. He's also the scholar who spent his nights threading Hebrew prophecy through history and his days running a hard-nosed anti-counterfeiting dragnet from the Tower of London, and those two worlds actually meet. In his observations upon the prophecies of Daniel, Newton coolly predicts a geopolitical nudge that would send the Jews back to their land, writing that the restoring command may perhaps come forth not from the Jews themselves, but from some other kingdom friendly to them. And then he shrugs with a line I love: "Let time be the interpreter." That restorationist thread, what scholars now call Christian restorationism and later generations would dub Christian Zionism, runs all through his private manuscripts. Historian Stephen Snoblin shows Newton was an equally ardent restorationist, collecting lists of biblical texts about a physical Jewish return and tying that return to the millennial reign, down to detailed notes on Romans 11 and the dispersed nation of the unbelieving Jews to be converted in the end. This wasn't churchy small talk for him. Newton read Joseph Mead like a roadmap. We even have his personal dog-eared copy of Mead's works, and he rebuilt the prophetic timeline around a literal Jerusalem, not a metaphor. Imagine taking a single image, your doodle of a jungle city, a photo of your messy disk, a screenshot of a retro platformer, and telling an AI, "Let me in," and it actually opens the door. That's the promise of Genie II, which DeepMind describes as a foundation world model capable of generating an endless variety of action-controllable, playable 3D environments. And the wild part is it runs off one prompt image and then lets a human or an AI agent play with keyboard and mouse like it's a real game. You're not watching a video clip. You're steering a simulation that remembers what's behind you, around the corner, or tucked out of frame. DeepMind puts it plainly: the model can remember parts of the world that are no longer in view and then render them accurately when they become observable again. That solves a classic immersion killer where worlds used to morph the second you looked away. The team says Genie II can keep a world coherent for up to a minute in many demos, which is long enough to explore a room, test a corridor, smash a barrel, open a door, and actually feel the layout in your head. Under the hood, it's not magic, it's machinery, an auto-regressive latent diffusion world model trained on a huge video dataset, wired to a big transformer dynamics model that predicts the next frame from your last action, and nudged with guidance, tricks to make sure your inputs really control what happens on screen. In practice, that means jump feels like a jump, swim feels like swim, and momentum behaves like momentum. The model shows off a grab bag of learned skills you normally expect from handcrafted engines. First-person vistas and isometric views, reflections twinkling off floors, smoke that curls, water that flows, all from that one seed image. And because the world is playable, you can do weirder things than just walk forward. Rewind reality into alternate timelines by taking different actions from the same starting frame, or drop a separate instruction following agent into the scene to test whether the environment is consistent enough to handle orders like turn around or go behind the house. For creators, this flips the prototyping loop on its head. You sketch concept art, generate a still, step inside, and immediately feel the space rather than imagining it from a static mood board, which is why the researchers talk about rapidly prototyping diverse interactive experiences. So far, the reaction from people using and posting it on TikTok has been mixed, with many claiming that this is a lazy way of doing art. Forrest Gump plays like a warm hug, but underneath the feather and the folksy drawl, it's a memory machine that sands off the sharp edges of American history. Watch how the movie keeps slipping Forrest into the biggest flashpoints of the late 20th century, standing at the University of Alabama while George Wallace blocks the door, getting his speech cut off on the National Mall, stumbling into Watergate with a phone call about flashlights. And notice what those scenes do. They turn convulsions into cute anecdotes, as if the civil rights struggle, the anti-war movement, and the collapse of a presidency were a string of funny mishaps you can retell at a cookout. The engine of that worldview is Forrest's radical obedience, a character who literally says his purpose in the army is to do whatever you tell me, drill sergeant. And the film rewards that posture at every turn with medals, celebrity, a shrimp empire, even early Apple stock, while people who question power get framed as confused, cruel, or doomed. Think of the Black Panther Party scene shot like a menace parade, or the anti-war rally where the words are literally silenced, or Jenny, the avatar of counterculture, whose trauma and experiments are punished with disease and an early grave, kept by the whispery sermon, "Stupid is as stupid does," a line that invites you to distrust intellectuals and trust easy answers. This isn't accidental craft, it's design. Robert Zemeckis directs a greatest hits tour of American turbulence, but swaps analysis for nostalgia, pushing needle drops and digital wizardry that stitch Forrest into archival footage so smoothly that you forget the politics of who's allowed to speak and who's framed as a clown. And the cumulative effect is a civics lesson that tells you institutions mostly self-correct, while good citizens keep their heads down and run when told. Run, Forrest, run. A mantra that valorizes compliance and turns protest into a punchline. By the time the feather floats again, we've sat through Vietnam as a loyalty test, the welfare state as a bootstrap story, Watergate as a comedic accident, and the AIDS crisis, never named, as a moral tragedy for one reckless soul rather than a public failure of care. Remember the context, 1994, a country fresh off Reagan-Bush narratives about personal responsibility and headed towards centrist third-way politics. Give Best Picture to a film that says history is something that happens to you, not something you shape, and if you resist the script, you'll end up like Genie, beautiful, restless, dead. Well, if you salute and stay polite, you'll be fine, maybe even rich. That's propaganda with a vanilla finish, a story that doesn't scream obey so much as whispers stop worrying. Let's talk about the Pentagon's so-called voice of God weapons. The phrase sounds like internet folklore, but it grew out of very real research back in the early 1960s. Alan H. Frey described the weird phenomenon where people exposed to pulsed radio waves reported hearing clicks, buzzes, even short tones inside their heads. The microwave auditory effect, and a decade later, a Walter Reed researcher named Joseph C. Sharp reportedly recognized the spoken words delivered the same way, not through ears, but through the nervous system. After that, patents started to stack up, with dry titles like hearing system, or methods and apparatus for audibly communicating using the microwave auditory effect. The bureaucratic way of saying, in principle, you can beam intelligible audio to a single person without any air vibrating speaker at all. That's the spooky root of the voice of God nickname. But the tree has other branches you can actually see. Long-range acoustic devices like LRADs that project voice and piercing tones down city blocks or across harbors, like what we're seeing right now being used against ICE protesters, crowd control by sound pressure, and parametric ultrasound rigs. Think audio spotlights that carve whisper narrow cones of audible sound out of ultrasound, so a message feels private even in a public space. And then there's the cousin tech that isn't about sound but absolutely messes with your body. The active denial system, a 95 gigahertz heat beam that dumps energy into the top layer of skin until your pain receptors scream and your whole animal brain says, "Move now." A lesson in how non-lethal can still be terrifying. Put that mix together, microwave hearing in the lab, directed sound in the street, heat pain at range, and you can see why PSYOP folks would salivate. There are rumors every few years claiming someone used a voice from nowhere to shake enemy morale, but those stories never come with hard evidence. John Quincy St. Clair. Some inventors file patents for gadgets, machines, and practical solutions to everyday problems. But then there's John Quincy St. Clair, a man whose name has become legendary among fringe researchers and internet conspiracy forums, not for building inventions, but for patenting technology so strange, so far beyond conventional science, that it feels like it was pulled from a classified government lab or a page from a Philip K. Dick novel. On paper, St. Clair is a Puerto Rico-based inventor. In reality, his patents read like a roadmap to a hidden future. They include devices for teleportation, hyperspace propulsion systems, and even a full-scale space-time curvature engine. One of his most infamous filings describes a full-body teleporter capable of moving a human from one location to another instantaneously, something mainstream physics says is impossible with today's technology. But St. Clair's work doesn't stop there. He's also credited with patents for a photon spacecraft, a magnetic monopole spacecraft, and a walking through walls training system. Some designs invoke Einstein's theories of relativity, quantum mechanics, and exotic concepts like manipulating gravitational fields, ideas that, while speculative in academic circles, are rarely seen in official government patent filings. So how did these patents get approved? That's where things get strange. Many point out that the United States Patent Office doesn't require an invention to be proven functional before granting a patent, only that it is described in enough technical detail to be theoretically possible. In St. Clair's case, his filings are dense with equations, diagrams, and technical jargon, enough to push them past the threshold for approval. This has sparked endless speculation online. Is St. Clair just a brilliant eccentric with a love for speculative engineering, or is he a front, a public face for technology that has already been developed in classified programs, not yet revealed to the public, quietly slipped into public record under the guise of fictional patents? Once again, I want to give a shout out to Hypnosio for sponsoring this video. Use my link in the description box and pinned comment and grab 15% off your first subscription.